The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. I have a few interesting stories to talk about today. One is about an organization called SETI, which is short for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. This is an organization I've been aware of, I would say, for probably 15 years. I mean, since I was pretty young, I was aware of SETI. They are now investigating some mysterious signal spikes that are coming from a 6.3 billion year old star in the constellation Hercules 95. In the constellation Hercules, which is 95 light years away from Earth. Immediately, people are saying, oh, this might be it. This might be the signals from other intelligent life. There is no actual evidence to suggest right now that these are coming from some kind of alien life. What there is the reality that these are unusual signals. These are different than the signals that have been historically picked up by SETI. They were originally discovered over a year ago by the Russian Academy of Science operated Ratan 600 radio telescope in Russia. They were kept secret from the international community. And an interstellar space reporter, that's quite a job title, I'm an interstellar space reporter, broke the news after the researchers quietly circulated a paper saying we've detected a strong signal in the direction of this star. This is considered to be a sun-like star in nature, almost identical composition to our own sun. So far, a single Neptune-like planet, although slightly warmer than Neptune, has been discovered in its orbit. But this could just be one of many planets that are there. This is very cool to me in the sense that I remember when you could download software for old, like Windows 95 or something, you could download SETI software, which when your screensaver ran, it would basically analyze data from these radio telescopes and send it back to SETI. And I remember thinking it was so cool. I downloaded the software and it would show graphs and charts of it processing data and sending it back to SETI. And it may be that we finally got something interesting from that sort of cloud-based joint research that was done by people's computers. But this, of course, may turn out to be absolutely nothing, but just the concept that we are now looking at very specific and unusual signals from 95 light years away, I find this stuff fascinating.
I kind of picture you there in a Rain Man-esque fashion,
Right.
kind of watching the data, analyzing, like, oh, there it is. Or kind of like those guys on, going and watching the Mars the Mars rover,
Yeah.
and kind of finding aliens in space. Interesting to think about. Is it real hard data? Not really yet.
Well, we don't know what it tells us about whether there was one article that you get one clickbait headline and all of a sudden it explodes. And there was one headline which said that these were artificial sources of interstellar noise or whatever. That's actually not said in the report that this is necessarily artificial. What they've said is they're not exactly like other signals that have been analyzed. And very quickly, word started to spread that we found aliens. We found an artificial source of signal, signal source 95 light years away. Not true, but very, very interesting to think about. Apple is having some trouble. After a 3-year investigation, the European Commission has ruled that Apple's Irish tax benefits are illegal. We've talked about this for a long time, the way that many big American companies, which really become transnational. I mean, is Apple really American? Yeah, their offices are based here, and the majority of their intellectual property that they were founded on was developed here in the United States. But they're sourcing materials from all over the world. The products are available all over the world. They're partnered with wireless carriers that are based all over the world. You have their factories producing the products all over the world in some specific areas of the world, as most people know. So the meaning of an American company has sort of been weakened over time. In any case, this investigative commission said that Ireland enabled Apple to pay substantially less than other businesses, basically paying an effective corporate tax rate of no more than 1%. Both Ireland and Apple disagree with the $13 billion penalty that has been assigned to Apple. There are a bunch of people now talking about what effect that size penalty could play in affecting stock price, for example, and that's more a question for Apple investors, of which I am not one. But this is more important in terms of the precedent it could set, and it relates to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. When we talk about the dangers of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, although it doesn't specifically apply to this exact scenario and Ireland necessarily, one of the dangers of the Trans-Pacific Partnership is that it would take the arbitration of many of these transnational companies that really exist across many countries outside of the laws of any one country and into essentially an international business arbitration, which of course is going to be stocked with individuals hand selected by companies based on the influence of those companies on governments. And it would essentially be a total sham. I don't know what's ultimately going to happen with this $13 billion fine. I don't know ultimately what is going to happen in terms of appeals or how much or if any of it is going to be paid or what precedent it sets for other companies. What I know is that if the Trans-Pacific Partnership passes, the entire mechanism through which this $13 billion fine was even assessed would essentially be made moot, because there would be I guess we could call it a supranational entity, which would make decisions about these matters, and it would make any country's individual rules essentially irrelevant. And that's just a disaster. That's hugely dangerous.
I was hearing in a news story this morning that what they were trying to do is exactly that. They're trying to set precedent. So this was the European Union was doing this, I think, right?
It's a European Commission, specifically in Ireland, which of course is part of the EU. Yes. So in short, yes.
But I heard that's basically what they're trying to do. They're trying to take over and just be the people in charge of all of this all over the world, essentially.
Right.
But something else I heard that was very interesting was this $13 billion, if it actually went to the Irish taxes, it would basically cover all the healthcare. I guess they have $100 billion debt is their debt, and that would just knock down all of the healthcare, and it would cover them completely. I think Apple's kind of at fault here, to say the least.
I was reading about that as well, and the problem I have with that argument, people pointed out, if you look at the size of Ireland and their financial situation, this $13 billion would go such a long way to improving many of the financial issues that exist in Ireland. That's all well and good, but that's not how we should determine whether a fine is appropriate, right? I mean, it should be determined by whether the company broke the law, and how much of it they should have to pay or not, I don't believe should be determined by in what way it would benefit the country and what the need is there. I just think that it's sort of a dangerous road to open if that's how we're going to evaluate these things.
Yeah. So somebody has to do it, I guess. And is it them? Should it be a more international community? Should it be the European Commission? I think somebody has to do it, is the bottom line. No, they didn't pay essentially 0.05, 0.5% they paid on taxes. They should be paying, 12.5% was the real figure. So
I agree with you. If the argument is this is money they should have already paid, and thus Ireland would have already had it in order to use for these social services, hey, by all means, have at it. I completely agree with that logic. But the idea that the fine is appropriate merely because there is a need is where I start to sort of go, I wouldn't call it a libertarian point of view, but I start to sort of get divorced from that. If the $13 billion is merely what they should have paid plus some kind of fine because you need to make it disadvantageous to try to avoid paying the taxes, I have no problem with it whatsoever, and absolutely defend the use for those social services. Obviously, anyone who watches the show knows that I believe those social services should no doubt be well funded. I have one other story I want to tell you about. I'm a big fan of reading, as many people on the show probably know. I love reading fiction. I read nonfiction. Not as big a fan of biography. I was recently talking to a friend of mine who's reading this 1,000-page biography of LBJ. Doesn't seem hugely appealing to me. But in any case, my reading interests are pretty widespread. In Australia, there are hundreds and hundreds of books traveling independently on the subways in Melbourne. And this is also now expanding to the commuter trains as well as buses. These are called free-range books, which are being set loose on public transport by book ninjas, is what they are calling them in Australia. This is a movement called Books on the Rail. And the idea is that the books have stickers on them and also a piece of paper inside which explain the project. And the idea is to circulate books throughout public transit, get people interested, get people reading. You can place a book on public transit. You can take a book and read it and then put it back on public transit, et cetera, et cetera. You can get stickers if you want to add books to the public transit book world. This is not a controversial story. It's not a story about someone doing something crazy. It's just a really cool thing that I think we should be doing. To me, it's a great and interesting way to sort of slightly gamify the idea of reading, and also, by the way, tie it into public transit rather than just people driving around, which in big cities is always a great thing to encourage. I think this is very cool. And if it gets more people to read, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's a fun, great idea. I love books, biographies, documentaries.
You're into biography.
I am, actually, yeah.
What do you like about it? When my friend who I was talking to over the weekend said he doesn't see it as nonfiction, as like a book about science is nonfiction. He sees it more as, if it's really well written, basically you have a great writer telling you the story of someone's life, and that for him, reading a good biography is more similar to reading fiction than actually reading like a science or business nonfiction book.
Yeah, it is largely that. So the one I'm actually just finishing now, I'm reading Ansel Adams's biography. And to me, I have a personal interest in many things. He's an environmental activist. He's a photographer. He's also just, it's interesting to hear all the things you don't know about a person, like a great culture figure like that, and what they really did with their life beyond, the obvious. What
do you feel like? So for example, when I read a good fiction novel, I feel like what I get out of it is really good storytelling and learning about the telling of a good story. And also, many times I will get a life lesson or some kind of interesting anecdote or something to think about that I actually can apply sort of in the real world. When I read nonfiction, usually I'm picking the nonfiction very specifically because there's something I'm interested in or want to learn. So right now I'm reading an interesting book called Mastery, and I forget the author's name, but it's the same guy who wrote the 48 Laws of Power. And it talks about the ways in which interesting historical inventors, artists, whoever, had either apprenticeships or became masters in their field. And it spans everybody from Marie Curie to Leonardo da Vinci, whatever. And I find it very interesting to learn about how people learned, for example. What is it that you feel you get out of reading a biography when it's a good one?
I feel like it's these intangibles you talk about, these little life lessons, things that you may not know. To me, yeah, it's partly the life lessons, but also the places, like you're talking about there. It's how they got to be where they were. The interesting part to me, and it kind of relates to my family, is so we have this one cousin of ours who has ADHD and has these big floppy ears, and kind of interesting. Ansel Adams supposedly was this kind of off the wall character. Nobody could control him as a child, and then they put him in front of a piano, and he learned the piano and became a great thinker, a great scholar. So interestingly enough, so I went to talk to my uncle and said, Oscar kind of reminds me of Ansel Adams. I think you should put him in front of a piano and maybe give him a chance to find something that he loves.
And it might not be a piano per se, but it could be something else. Yeah. No, that is interesting. Autobiography, I am even less into than biography. And it's crazy because my mom's PhD is in Latin American autobiographies. So it's like super, super specific. And yet for me, it has not translated into interest in that genre. Really, we're talking about memoirs when we talk about autobiography. Not something I've been a fan of.
Could it be a little bit Oedipal complex there? Probably got forced to read maybe one or two as a young child.
I really didn't. She never forced me to read any autobiographies. Okay. I am absolutely sure of it. Okay, so Book Ninjas in Australia. I love it. We will talk to you on Monday. No, Monday is Labor Day. We will actually, this is a good opportunity to mention, there will be no new bonus show on Monday because it is Labor Day. We are off. I will be at a wedding in Pennsylvania, and I predict some interesting stories for the Tuesday show, which is when we will next talk to you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.